And it is interesting that the same conference where they released this proclamation was, a couple weeks after COVID hit and really changed a lot. And you kind of joked that, there was supposed to be a pretty big conference and kind of celebration at that time in recognition of, 200 years since the first vision. And then it was really subdued because of COVID. And, the unfortunate thing is, I think COVID kind of stole the spotlight of so much of not just that conference, but that time period, when really maybe the blessing of that is what should be the spotlight or the highlight of that conference, and perhaps that's this proclamation. And yet I feel like we have a tendency to overlook it. I don't know that it has received as much fanfare as some of the other proclamations that have come out previously. Because, for instance, when they did the family proclamation, I remember that proclamation consistently being discussed and brought up in talks or in lessons at church, and it just seemed like it was definitely utilized more internally in the church. And then this proclamation comes out and, everyone's freaking out about COVID for 2 years. And maybe that's something that we should internalize and say, I wonder why that is, and maybe we should look back and say, perhaps we should be focusing on and putting a larger spotlight on this proclamation and the timing of it and when it came out. And that's not a coincidence. There's a purpose for it and a reason for it. And maybe it's now our duty and our job to go back and say, the Lord released this at that time and brought it forth for a very specific purpose. And maybe we should be focusing on it and studying it with more intensity than I think what it has received, simply because of COVID. For 2 years after that, 2.5 years after it was released, COVID kind of took up everyone's capacity, and I think that's maybe that would be foolish on our part to allow the adversary to continue to blind us from what the Lord was seeking to have us focus on. And many of us chose to focus on that as opposed to what was ultimately the highlight of that conference.
Well, think about it. It's a proclamation. To whom? To the world. Okay? The church, now a global church with global media, with a global presence, is officially proclaiming the restoration of the gospel of Jesus Christ to the world. Okay? This is very significant. Okay? As we're going to get into in section 1, when Joseph Smith restored the gospel, there was not much fanfare. There was no means of declaring it to the world. Right? He started missionary efforts, right, to do such. But now we're in an age, and we have an institution that can do that. That can make such declarations and can declare such things to all ends of the earth. And it was done. And it was done. And I mean, is it coincidence that when it was done, it was like the entire media was so concentrated with COVID that no one heard it, right?